You have a prepaid call from
Charles.
an inmate at the California State Prison, Corcoran, California. To accept this call, say or dial 5 now.
Oh, hello. All the things that we did that was considered crazy in those days, they're making movies about it now.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
They're still sending me naked pictures of Sharon Tate all stabbed up and saying, there's blood on your hands and you did this and you did that. There's a lot of ways of crucifying somebody without hanging them on a cross. You being a producer, it's like you gotta get in the heads of everybody. Have you ever trusted anyone? Have you? That's what I'm doing in here.
This began a year ago when Charles Manson, a man thought to be the embodiment of evil, started calling.
If you can find a way to get me a cell phone to where I can use it and call, let me get in the game. If you can find a way where you can do what you want to do, but as soon as you get there, you're going to have 15,000 people who are covering up what they've already been stealing and doing.
What do you say to one of the most infamous mass murderers of all time when given the chance? We asked for his story in his own words.
I don't give a fuck about telling my story. My story has already been all over the world 1,000 times. You are for you, right? Right on. As long as we understand that this is not based on friendship, not based on brotherhood. It's based on guns and knives. It's based on revolution and war, politics and governments, survival.
Though decades have passed since his conviction, the obsessive interest never waned. Manson, of all people, appreciates his notoriety.
I'm the most famous human being, not only that is alive, but the most famous human being that ever lived, and I'm not even dead yet. Do you think the fuck is gonna happen when I die?
The problem is Manson is famous. The kids nowadays, they don't look behind to see exactly what it is he did.
In the late 60s, Charles Manson was convicted for the brutal murder of actress Sharon Tate and 8 others. He was sentenced to death for all of them. When the California Supreme Court abolished the death penalty in 1972, his sentence was commuted to life in prison.
The reality of it is, beyond the bullshit, is on death row. We've already done that, been there. The people that haven't done it and haven't been there, they don't understand it, you know. They don't have respect for it. I got respect.
Manson's murder spree took place in the summer of 1969. It was the peak of the Vietnam War and a time of civil unrest. It is said that Charles Manson was the leader of a cult called the Manson family. They lived outside of society, indulging in a constant stream of drugs and sex.
We went where nobody had ever went before, not thinking about it. It just happened, man. I wasn't nobody's leader. All I was fucking everybody I could. Sex revolution, everybody was doing it. I just getting my share, that's all.
The first murder took place in July of 1969. Manson was convicted of ordering 3 of his disciples to kill and associate in a plot to extort money. After they stabbed the victim to death, Manson's followers wrote on the walls in his blood, A month later, the murders escalated. The official account from the Los Angeles District Attorney is this: Charles Manson sent out more cult members to an isolated house in Beverly Hills with orders to kill everyone inside. It was the home of beautiful and pregnant movie star Sharon Tate, who was spending the evening with friends.
How could they drive up to that house, get out, and know what they're gonna do? Nobody was gonna leave that house alive. And it just boggles the mind. He says, all right, go out and do this, and then you're all in the car together going, okay, we're gonna do it. Nobody says, like, should we be doing this? Or is Charlie right? You know, no question, unquestionable. They went and did what they did.
At Charles Manson's trial, the prosecution stated, on the evening of August the 8th, 1969, Charles Manson sent his robots out on a mission of murder. There is no evidence that he actually personally killed any of the victims in this case.
If you had to get up and cut and kill your food every day, you'd be a hell of a warrior, man.
Before they left, one of the killers wrote on a door, this time using Sharon Tate's blood.
They wanted to shock the public.
In a scene described by investigators as reminiscent of a weird religious ritual, 5 persons, including actress Sharon Tate, were found dead. Among the other victims were Hollywood hairstylist Jay Sebring. One officer summed up the murders when he said, "In all my years, I have never seen anything like this before."
I was in the kitchen and the phone rang. He said they think Jay and Sharon have just been murdered. I remember just sinking down. I was standing up against the sink, and I just sank down to the floor. It was like, I'm melting, I'm melting. I was stunned, I was shocked, I was in hysterics.
When the murders took place, people were buying Gatling guns. The whole town bought guns. They were frightened to death for months.
For someone to hang up the phone on your boyfriend and then the next morning hear that he's been brutally murdered with 3 of his friends, that's horrifying.
Manson's crime spree wasn't finished. The day after the murder of Sharon Tate and others, Charles Manson took members of his group out again. This time, they went to the home of an affluent couple named Lino and Rosemary LaBianca. Allegedly, Manson ordered 3 of his followers to butcher the couple, leaving more messages written in blood.
They never lied about me. All that Bob said is, I think, he said, go in there and kill those people. Well, she could think a big elephant. That's hearsay.
It's like a horror movie. It's like those movies where you wonder who's going to be next.
People put the bad mouth on somebody for all kinds of psychological reasons. Jealousy is a big reason people maneuver.
When Charles Manson and his family were arrested and charged, it became the longest and most expensive trial in the history of Los Angeles.
The fright in the town was so gigantic about this. And he looked like the devil sitting in court. That trial was like a circus. I mean, it was insanity.
During the trial, Manson carved an X in his forehead, which he later turned into a swastika, and shaved off all of his hair to symbolize his desire to be discarded from society. His followers all did the same.
They don't realize that X on them heads means that head is gone, man. You know, they still think that person's there because they got a head, you dig? But I took that head. I got it on my belt.
Every time I went to court every day, they'd be out there, you know, singing Charlie, Charlie, and the swastikas on the head, shaving their hair. And, you know, I mean, that's not normal. You know, that's Looney Tunes right there.
For half a century, Charles Manson's bizarre behavior continued, and speculation over his unspeakable crimes has only intensified. But the question has always remained, how did Charles Manson get these people to kill for him?
That stupid fucking district attorney convicted me for a fucking helter-skelter thing that he was thinking. But it took me 40 years to figure out what a cult was.
When speaking to Charles Manson, the topic of helter-skelter comes up frequently, and Manson's answer is always the same. He maintains that helter-skelter was invented by the prosecution. The Manson family's convictions were led by Vincent Bugliosi, who wrote the book Helter-Skelter, which became the best-selling true crime book of all time. According to Bugliosi, Helter-Skelter was a name Charles Manson gave to his own bizarre philosophy, which he derived from the name of a Beatles song.
One of their favorite things to do is they would sit around on acid and listen to the Beatles' White Album. They determined what the Beatles were doing is they were sending messages to blacks to rise up and start a revolution.
Manson allegedly convinced his followers that he foresaw the race war prophesied by the Beatles and told them they needed to slaughter white, affluent victims to further inspire the Black Revolution.
Helter-skelter, it's a social uprising between the blacks and the whites, the start of a race war, the apocalyptic end, if you will. Charlie and the family will hide underground. They will be the remaining ones left.
The prosecution claimed that Charles Manson and his followers planned to hide out in a secret cave located in Death Valley and wait out the war. When the dust had settled, they would emerge, and Charles Manson believed he would rebuild the world.
To say it was an unusual motive is an understatement, but I can tell you that was the motive.
Nothing could have been more horrendous than what happened that night to innocent people who didn't even know they're murderers, and the reasons that this maniac orchestrated this whole thing were just Looney Tunes.
I think, God damn, this is not what I wanted to be. Doesn't matter what I wanted.
According to Manson, Helter-Skelter is a myth, and the true story behind the murders is one that remains untold.
I've been deep in thought in solitary confinement for almost 40 years, thinking, what the hell does all this mean? How does that fit? Where does that work? And the stuff that I've come up with, man, is just unbelievable. It's fucking totally unbelievable.
When speaking to Charles Manson, the most famous mind-controlling mass murderer of all time, you had to be careful not to take him at his word. But after months of conversations, questions began to emerge.
The precious point is that the helter-skelter that the DA made into what he was doing was basically, when they lose control, they don't admit that they lost control. They just lost face, and then make another movie like you're doing.
People who have looked into the case beyond just a superficial level of reading Helter-Skelter don't believe any of that stuff. In fact, most of the media do believe that he was trying to ignite a race war and called Helter-Skelter and the whole thing.
We spoke with authors, researchers, and people who know Charles Manson directly. Charles Manson personally put us in contact with people who know him, others we found on our own. We sought to speak to anyone who was there when the crimes took place, all to unravel what actually happened.
Back in 1969, we didn't have access to the police reports. We didn't have access to autopsy or the FBI files. So we're more inclined to believe the official narrative.
You'll find out, man. Have a good day, brother.
This is Global Tel-Link. You have a prepaid call from
Bobby.
an inmate at the California Medical Facility, Vacaville, California.
Bobby Beausoleil was the first person arrested and accused of being a member of the Manson family. He's been in prison since 1969.
It is extremely important that people understand what happened. If we don't want the same kind of things to happen again, we have to understand them, and we can't understand them in the context of Vincent Bugliosa's little horror story. He did more to victimize Sharon Tate than Charlie Manson did. It's the same regurgitated, helter-skelter nonsense that is so far away from the truth. I will never, to get a parole, say that what Bugliosi said was true. Never. I'd rather die in prison than get out on a lie. Part of it was the times and the desperation that had set in 1969. And, you know, the events got out of hand. A lot of his attitudes and beliefs that had been engendered while he was in prison became expressed. And again, I'm not defending him. You know, he was a psychopath, for sure. And that had been not genetic, but something that had been developed. You know, his compassion and empathy had been beaten out of him by the system that he grew up in, which was juvenile justice and criminal justice system.
Manson told many people many stories about his childhood, but certain aspects of his upbringing are irrefutable. His birth certificate from 1934 identifies his mother as Kathleen Maddox, a 15-year-old single mother who struggled with alcohol and was often arrested.
My mother and my uncle get times she was a throwaway.
Sometime around 1944, when Kathleen couldn't care for her son or she was arrested, Manson began what would become a lifetime in prison. Michael Channels has known Manson personally for 25 years and has quite possibly spent more time face-to-face with him than anyone else.
If there is a Charlie Manson was probably created the first time he went into those boys' homes. That kid went through some hell in there. And some of the things that he told me, he would never admit to being raped by men or anything like that. That's just one thing he just don't do. He just don't.
Well, you're in Boys Town. You're a juvenile. You go when you're 10 years old and you play ping pong, and if someone beats you, you gotta keep the table up to them. Unless you want to fight them, everything is about fight. If you don't fight, they'll fuck you in the ass.
He'll tell you about being taken down in the basement and putting on a table and make him get naked and beat him with a strap. That'll turn you into somebody that's starting to think, okay.
They'll take everything you got, and you're raised up like that. So you learn how to box, and you learn how to fight. And some guy gets a dagger or a knife or an ice pick, then it's a different kind of fight. You graduate and you grow up.
That puts you in a whole different mindset. It's about life or death where he's at. Life or death.
I've only been outside a couple years when I got this case here. You figure that if you go locked up in reform school when you're 9 years old and you don't get out until you're 20, in your brain, you're still 9 years old on the outside. Can you see that?
He doesn't trust nobody. He doesn't even trust me. Up until this day, as long as I can tell you that I've known him and interacted with him as a pen pal, visited him in jail, talked to him on the telephone for some 25 years now, he don't trust me as far as he can spit.
Anyone that helps me is helping themselves. And I don't get much help because there ain't nobody there. So it's like everybody that's using me, they're not helping me. They're just riding on me.
Police records reflect that by the time Charles Manson was 24 years old, he'd been arrested more than 30 times. Among his numerous offenses, he'd been caught driving stolen cars across state lines, broken his probation, escaped from a federal prison, was convicted of check forgery, mail theft, and even pimping.
The first time I visited him, he walked out of the back. It was just, prison was just radiating off of him. He's prison. He's not from your world and my normal world out here.
Those, like George Stimson, who've spent time visiting Charles Manson in person, insist that his view of the world is defined by his life in prison.
Prison is a mind. The mind is prison. That's why they haven't been able to break me, because there's no such thing. They're in a fantasy. They don't have a reality.
I've met him, and I've talked to him a lot. When I've looked in his eyes, he said himself, if he was guilty of anything, he wouldn't have made it through this long. You can feel people. You know, truth tellers, you feel them right away, and you want to be around them. He's not lying about nothing.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes as a collective society.
The idea of prison is what we get from the media, unless you've been in there. But there's also a brotherhood there that's not usually talked about.
Had I not done 22 years in prison before I got arrested this time, I would not have survived. The only reason I survived is I've been through everything in prison ever since I was 9 years old.
It's hard to understand, unless you really kind of have an understanding of how things operate in prison and how selfish people tend to think when they're in that environment.
Leading up to the summer of 1967, Charles Manson was in Los Angeles serving time for check forgery in a federal prison called Terminal Island. Two years before the murder spree, Phil Kaufman was arrested trying to smuggle marijuana into the U.S. from Mexico. He ended up in prison alongside Charles Manson.
I got arrested in Tucson, Arizona. I got to Terminal Island, and I had just gone through the A&O, admission and orientation, and before I was allowed out in the yard. There's this guy with a guitar. Being in prison, and you got to be careful who you associate with. And Charlie was a good guy to hang out with because he didn't give a fuck, and he played music.
Phil Kaufman knew Manson on the inside before anyone ever associated the name Charles Manson with the devil incarnate. Kaufman recalls the man he called Charlie as a laid-back inmate, fully comfortable in prison life, to the point that he was completely unwilling to reform.
If you get 5 years in a federal penitentiary and they don't give you any incentive, you just do 5 years and you're uncontrollable. But when you're sentenced and they give you good time, so a 5-year sentence may be only 40 months. But Charlie didn't do that. He did all the time. He didn't program. If they got 5 years, Charlie did 5 years.
According to prison records, Charles Manson received countless reprimands. He once described a prison confrontation in the 60s when a common punishment was for the guards to have the inmates give in by putting their nose to the wall.
We fought for 48 days and 48 nights trying to put my nose on the wall. Told me I ain't putting my goddamn nose on that wall, fuck you. And they'd come in and rush me and throw me up against the wall, man, like it or not. Then I'd slide down the wall. Next day they'd come, they get up against the wall. I'd say, no way. Here we go again. Yeah, they can beat me, but they can't eat me.
He was playing his guitar, and I said, this guy sounds good. So a guard comes up to him and says, Manson, you ain't never going to get out of here. Charlie just kept playing his guitar and said, out of where, man? And just kept going.
I was a federal prisoner, dead, when I got out of Terminal Island. Can you understand that? There was like, I had played that game and won every pocket.
Manson's release paperwork from Terminal Island is dated March 21st, 1967. Vietnam was at the forefront of the American consciousness, and a large segment of the male population was either at war or school. Many of the women left behind were embracing what would become known as the Summer of Love.
There was a lot of runaways at the time, and a lot of people disenchanted with the status quo. And they were easy marks. You know, especially up in San Francisco, man, you know, the acid and the pot and everything. They were looking for love, and Charlie was, you know, selling it wholesale.
This is when it's been reported that Charles Manson formed a cult called the Manson family. How did he transition from a chronic petty criminal to a psychotic villain capable of mind control? Until this point in his life, he'd never been charged with a violent crime, and no one had ever described him as a guru or spiritual leader. So something had to change in the summer of 1967.
In prison, they call it run. When I get out of prison, I run till I'm back in prison again.
According to Manson, right after prison, he spent the first year going back and forth between Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco and Topanga Canyon in Los Angeles.
I went to Frisco and I was talking to this supposedly great holy guy, you dig? And he's telling me when you can sit and be comfortable and at peace with yourself, that you're just in harmony. So now check this out. I figured a lot of things out. I figured it would be easier not to understand anything and keep your mind open and never make your mind up about nothing.
Charles Manson's mix of 60s culture and prison jargon attracted young women. Communes were abundant in California in 1967. This is when Manson met the first two members of what would become known as the Manson family. Mary Bruner, who would later give birth to his child, and Lynette Fromm, better known as Squeaky.
Remember, these weren't ordinary people. And I get upset with the historians that refer to this group as hippies. They weren't hippies. Hippies were flower children. They believed in make love, not war. The family referred to themselves as slippies. They said they were going to slip under the awareness of society. They were very violent. It was a religious cult.
At trial, the prosecution stated that the family was nothing more than a closely knit band of vagabond robots who were slavishly obedient to one man and one man only, their master, their leader, their god, Charles Manson. One member of the group was Catherine Gillies. She adopted the nickname Capistrano, or Cappy for short, after she fell in with Manson in the spring of 1968.
None of that shit was real, okay? We were trying to step out of society is what we're trying to do. We didn't have stabbing practice on Saturday and hang Charlie from a cross and poke him with sticks on Sunday. I mean, none of those things are real. We didn't call ourselves the Manson family. That was this press. We called ourselves a family, but we meant that because we were brothers and sisters, not because we were the family. We were a family.
Another member, named Sandra Good, collaborated on a book with her partner, George Stimson, in which he talked about life inside the so-called Manson family.
A lot of people do that when you're young and you're living with people. Yeah, we're like a family, but, you know, it doesn't have the connotation that Manson family does, capital M, capital F.
This contention appears to be supported by the trial transcripts. In many instances, Vincent Bugliosi says clearly that the group called themselves the family, but no one ever refers to them as the Manson family, the label often reported, which according to George Stimson is significant.
The thought that he was actively recruiting people to set up some kind of organization to carry out his homicidal, aims is just ridiculous.
But the reality is they did commit homicidal acts. However, according to several individuals who were part of the group, the label the Manson family was only used by the press and not consistent with how they interacted or viewed themselves at the time.
Most of them were inexperienced with regards to communes prior to joining that one. So their only experience with communes would have been with Charlie and with his group.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
They were always free to leave.
It's weird, man. It's like you see a bunch of people and they're coming along in your life and they're doing what you've already done. I noticed this about people when they think I'm a hippie cult leader.
The group was made up primarily of young women. Contrary to the common picture of Manson being a master manipulator who recruited them and controlled their minds, Bobby Beausoleil related that they came together much differently.
What most people don't understand is that it wasn't Charlie's charisma that attracted more women. It was once he had two women together, the women attracted the women. Women like a community of women. And that was the attraction in that group.
How they came together and viewed themselves genuinely matters, because it is the first part of understanding whether Manson and the others were a hippie commune or a religious cult. The helter-skelter theory was dependent upon Manson being a brainwashing cult leader, but the people who were part of the group denied that dynamic. Is there another explanation for their heinous acts, other than Manson dictating that they murder on his behalf?
I never ordered nobody to do anything without what they wanted to do. Do what you want. You and me, you're free like me. I do what I want to do. You do what you want to do. Be careful with this phone call and don't use it to cause any more persecution to my friends, my family. Peace. I got to go. My phone's time's up.
The media has characterized the women who participated in the murders as middle class and virtuous. They have been described as Girl Scouts, good students, or Sunday school teachers that Manson transformed into serial killers. Why would young women with good backgrounds leave their homes to live with an ex-convict who just wanted sex and death? Leslie Van Houten was 19 when she met Charles Manson. The following summer, she joined two others in the slaughter of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca.
The problem people have is, how can you go from a homecoming queen to being a Manson follower? Her childhood was really good until her parents got divorced. Back then, it was very different than it is now. It was a big social stigma. She ended up with the druggy kids and the less desirables, and she started using drugs at that time. She got pregnant. Her mother pretty much pressured into having an illegal abortion in the home, and they buried the fetus in the backyard. And that's something she couldn't get away from. And then after that, the drug use escalated.
She was looking for a spiritual leader, and she had already left home and went out on the road. And Bobby takes her to meet Charlie. I think it might have bothered him that she would challenge him. She and Pat were really the only two that would.
Patricia Krenwinkel, named Katie, was with Leslie Van Houten the night they killed the LaBiancas. Krenwinkel also participated in the Sharon Tate murders. At parole hearings, she's described that her sister was a drug addict who died from an overdose at the age of 29. Before her death, she introduced Patricia to drinking, drugs, and alcohol. When Krenwinkel met Manson, she was 19. She left home to live with her heroin-addicted sister in Venice, California. One of the most infamous murderers was Susan Atkins, who took the nickname Sadie. She brutally murdered Sharon Tate and used her blood to write "pig" on a door.
Susan Atkins had a terrible childhood. She was abandoned by her parents. She was molested.
When Susan Atkins was 15, her mother died from cancer, sending her home life into a spiral. When Atkins met Charles Manson, she'd already worked as a topless dancer, been arrested for car theft, stolen property, and was a heavy drug user.
I used to think that you came down off an acid trip after 12 hours. And every time you drop acid, you get a little bit further away from reality.
Susan's pretty, she's me, actually. Me is all there is. There's nobody but you.
I took so much acid that I just was what I would term spaced. And it took me many years to what I term now re-enter. And that was just through not having any acid and having to deal with reality every day.
If these women were not perfect young women plucked from society and corrupted solely by Charles Manson, did he actually brainwash them, or were they working alongside him in a common motive? What was life like inside the so-called Manson family the year leading up to the murders? When you ask Charles Manson about life in the group before the murders, he talked about sex.
Everybody walk around naked. We'd all get together and just have a big bang, man.
I lived with him for almost a month. He'd say, everybody has to make love. It's love, spread the love, Yeah, it was like sex on demand.
When you're inside, you have nothing, and all of a sudden he's out. He said it was a prisoner's dream come true.
Another member of the group was Barbara Hoyt, who, like many of the others, was 17 when she ran away from home after an argument with her father.
I met Squeaky. Sandy was pregnant. Sadie talked about the hypocrisies of life.
Nobody's been able to get women together with each other. They're jealous creatures. It's hard to get two women together. And here comes along a nobody from prison who ain't even been out of prison long enough to spell his name right. He's got 35 women up and doing whatever, you dig?
If Manson had found the dream life of an ex-convict, why would he indoctrinate them to murder people?
These murders did not happen because there was going to be an apocalyptic race war. That's not why this happened. The victims weren't chosen at random.
Brian Davis has spent more than a decade speaking to anyone involved in the events surrounding the murders on his online radio show. From his viewpoint, the key to understanding what happened is Charles Tex Watson, because he was the person that actually led the murder parties on both nights and killed more than anyone else.
Tex was perfect. A soldier who's in service is righteous and real. There's no in between.
At trial, Vincent Bugliosi said Manson had total and complete domination over his family, including the actual killer, Tex Watson. How did Tex Watson come to be with Manson and perhaps fall under his control? Brian Davis recounts that in 1967, Watson left northern Texas to live with a friend in Los Angeles, finding a part-time job at a Hollywood wig shop.
I talked with the guy that worked with Tex. He said Tex was an all-American boy. After about a year, Tex started to hang out at parties and smoke marijuana, start to experiment with drugs and grew his hair out a little bit. And at that point, he said Tex started to turn. So all this was going on leading up before Tex ever met Charlie.
Tex Watson met Charles Manson when he was invited to attend a never-ending party that was being held at a Pacific Palisades mansion. The house was owned by the drummer of the Beach Boys, Dennis Wilson.
Charlie crosses over into that through the girls. Pat and Ella Jo Bailey were out hitchhiking, and Dennis Wilson picked them up.
The Beach Boys' 15th studio album, 2020, features a song co-written by Charles Manson called Never Learn Not to Love. During that time, Manson befriended a record producer through Dennis Wilson named Terry Melcher.
Terry Melcher. Remember him?
Terry Melcher?
Melcher. Terry Melcher.
I don't know I knew that he said he did us recording, and he had known one of the Beach Boys.
When he met Charles Manson, Terry Melcher lived on Cielo Drive in the same house that was later rented to film director Roman Polanski and his movie star wife, Sharon Tate. This is a direct connection between Manson and the Tate murders. Prosecutors claim that Manson was an ambitious musician who aspired to be like the Beatles and the Beach Boys, so Dennis Wilson introduced him to Terry Melcher, but Melcher rejected him. When Manson decided to begin a race war by killing random white people, he chose Terry Melcher's house. According to the prosecution, the residence was symbolic to Charles Manson, and particularly the establishment's rejection of him. Phil Kaufman worked in the music industry and recorded Charles Manson shortly before the murders took place. This is an audio recording from 1970 made as part of the investigation.
Up to this point, he had recorded at various studios, and being as transient as he was, he never stayed around long enough in order to consummate a record deal. So every time he recorded, no one could ever release his music because he had never signed any contract.
Because he had a good thing going for him, Money wasn't even involved in anything. You didn't have to earn a living. You got girls coming out and getting them food. He was having sex. He was playing his music, Life was good for him.
I could have been a rock and roll star. I could have been a movie star. That's the slowdown. I don't want a fucking job. I'd rather have a bite of wine on the beach and be free as a dog looking for a place to sleep under the bridge rather than go to work. I was trying to get away from civilization.
If Manson wasn't rejected by the music industry and Melcher's house didn't represent the establishment to him, then what was the real reason for Tex Watson taking 3 women over to Terry Melcher's house and killing 5 people? We put this question to Charles Manson directly.
Tex wasn't wrong. You understand what I'm saying? Tex had to do what he had to do. And he said that. He didn't say I told him to do a damn thing. They say the girl said it, but the girl didn't say it. She said, Charlie told me to go do what Tex said. You know why the district attorney put the race war on me?
You have 30 seconds remaining.
You got the whole damn fucking planet against me.
Charles Manson's answers are not always straightforward, but the missing factor may be the song Charles Manson contributed to the Beach Boys.
Charlie was told that he would be compensated for the use of the song. And the amount that he was told was $5,000. Now, he didn't care so much about the money. If you're in prison and you owe somebody and you give your word and you don't keep your word, then, that's a justification for being killed. So he sent Tex to kill Terry. Not a house full of 5 people. See, that's what's so critical here. He wasn't picking a house full of innocent people. He was picking Terry Melcher, and the people that were there were the ones that took the brunt of what Tex Watson brought there that night.
Charles Manson seeking retaliation on Terry Melcher for breaking his word contradicts the motive laid out by the prosecution because it changes Manson's intent from starting a race war to vengeance. According to the helter-skelter theory, Charles Manson planned to inspire a race war by killing affluent whites, so he sent his followers to Terry Melcher's house. During the war, Manson would hide with his followers in a secret cave located in Death Valley. Afterwards, they would emerge, and Manson would lead the victorious Black Army.
When members joined the family, he was telling them how Adolf Hitler was his hero for what Hitler did to Jews in World War II. He was a follower of Nietzsche. Just sick stuff.
They say Manson wants to have a race war. He wants the black people are going to rise up and kill all the white people. For a supposed person that hates black people, why would he want to be now in charge? The story loses me all over the place.
Some have proposed that the prosecution made up the helter-skelter theory in order to more easily convict Charles Manson through a sensationalistic conspiracy narrative. Another theory exists, which some believe can explain the murders without the race war motive.
I'm not supporting Charlie Manson at all. I'm supporting more of the truth.
If the prosecution did construct the helter-skelter theory, is convicting a man like Charles Manson so essential that any means of achieving it is acceptable?
It's not about proving Charlie innocent. Even if it's Charlie Manson, the law has to work for everybody.
This thing is so vast. I don't know whether you can accept it.
Get out of my house.
Another theory proposes that the murders were the culmination of events centered around Charles Manson. Charles Manson had been released from prison and had formed a commune of lost souls. For several months before the murders, the group had moved to a farmstead built as a backdrop for Western movies and television shows called Spahn Ranch.
I never realized it. But the reason the ranch was so cool was that nobody ever lied to each other, man. We all
got along with each other, man. Everybody was straight up, you know, there was no bullshit. We had a pretty nice little group of people there.
When I went to the ranch, I felt it was just the most mellow place I'd ever been. There was no ambitions. It's a lot different than what the media might portray.
The ranch was owned by an 80-year-old blind man named George Spahn, who lived in the main house, which was located there. The ranch burned down in 1971, but at the time extended along the Santa Susana Pass, isolated by the hills overlooking the San Fernando Valley.
Everybody's race was one. There was only one moving thing on that ranch. It was George Spahn, the old blind man. George was the boss. And it was like the horses ruled the ranch. We all served whatever is capable of a service. A slave understands its master much more than the master understands his slave.
Charlie told Squeaky to, take care of George so that they could stay at the ranch, and she did.
She didn't like having sex with other men, and that's why she got into that for Charlie. She took care of George, and that became her thing. She wanted to only have sex with Charlie, and so she put herself in that position where she didn't have to have sex with anybody but Charlie. She was a caretaker.
She loved him. I think he wanted George to will the ranch to Squeaky.
Records reflect that while living at Spahn Ranch, Tex Watson was arrested on a drug charge in April of 1969, 3 months before the murders.
It was business for Tex. He partook and he sold. That's how he made a lot of his money. You go back before the murders, Tex has got the history for dealing drugs and making drug deals, and that's what Tex does.
Don't lie on this ranch. Anything other than that, you can do anything you want here. You still hurt nobody.
This is the connections. This is where it all connects. Tex Watson had a dope dealer. Tex Watson describes a dope dealer in his book as a mafia-connected guy who owned a vending machine company that he used as a front for his dope business.
Episodes like that happen every day in the drug world.
On July 1st, Tex Watson spoke with his vending machine dope dealer who was looking to sell 25 kilos of marijuana for $2,500. Watson didn't have that kind of money, so he called his girlfriend in the city. She introduced him to another drug dealer named Bernard Crow, who was thought to be associated with the Black Panthers. It was then that Watson came up with a scam. He would buy 25 kilos from his dealer, then sell 22 kilos to Crow at a markup for $2,750. That way, Watson could buy the drugs from the dealer and deliver what he promised to Bernard Crow, all the while keeping the difference in money and drugs for himself and his girlfriend. To make that work, neither of the drug dealers could meet, so Tex Watson planned to have Bernard Crow pay up front.
If the conflicts say, if you do all the talking, you got to be all the right. That's what everything fucked up.
When the time came, Crow wouldn't hand over his money to a hippie he didn't know, so he kept Tex Watson's girlfriend as collateral while Watson went to pick up the drugs. When this complication arose, Watson burned them both.
He just promised to deal some drugs for him and took the money and ran.
What happened was Tex made a deal with him, evidently, and then fucking bummed out on the deal. We didn't get anything out of it. It had nothing to do with us. It was all about Tex. Trust me.
After that, an enraged Bernard Crow set out to find the man he knew as Charlie Watson.
When Crow called the ranch and asked for Charlie, meaning Charles Watson, TJ got Charlie Manson on the phone because he knew Watson as Tex.
I want my money.
And when Crow said, I want my money, and I'm coming up to the ranch to burn the place down and rape all the girls there, Charlie said, no, you're not. I'll come down and talk to you about it.
The deal of drugs, you got to be real. That's and the law is going to do about it. Before the cops catch drug dealers catch drug dealers.
He was worried about us getting killed. We had babies there and all kinds of stuff, and all these like young people, okay? And they were trying to kill us. And that's why Charlie went to Bernard, to stop him before he killed somebody.
Bernard Crowe had Tex Watson's girlfriend tied up, and I guess words were exchanged, and Charlie pulled out the gun and shot him.
Yeah, I shot the Crowe. She said that Bernard was going to kill her. So we went down to help her and ended up shooting him to help her.
Bernard Crowe didn't give him a chance. He had to shoot him or he was going to get shot. And Bernard Crowe just said, you better shoot me now.
Right here.
Do it. You know, and Charlie shot him.
Bernard Crowe survived this shooting, although as Manson often detailed, he was unaware of this.
This is a message in the underworld and being righteous with the underworld. In other words, you don't get caught off base or you get tagged out. It's a simple game.
He saw all the people that he was with as just children. They were weak. They wouldn't know how to hold their mud. And rather than try to convince them that they should, he just manipulated them to try to make them so complicit in violent crimes that they would not snitch on.
In the alternative theory, Charles Manson shooting Bernard Crowe left him with two problems. First, he had to be sure no one in the commune would talk to the police, so he planned to encourage them to commit violent crimes for the group just like he had done.
I play cards. My family's cards. My family are righteous. They can't get away. They're dead. Every one of my family is dead like me.
Manson's second problem was that he believed the Black Panthers would retaliate for the shooting, something he told the members of the group.
He was very worried about the Black Panthers attacking the ranch. It went from happy-go-lucky, fun, it got so intense, so fearful. Makes me nervous just to talk about it.
We were in trouble with everybody that was against us. Anybody that didn't like us, we didn't like them. We were fighting all the time, man.
Charlie, when he had that situation with Crowe, and I went out there to hang out, I didn't know what had happened. And he pulled me aside. He said, man, I don't have enough guys here. I'm expecting a retaliation from the Black Panthers, and I need more guys here. So, I was a young kid, and that sort of appealed to my ego.
Everybody wants everybody else dead. Nobody likes anybody.
I heard Charlie was recruiting the straight Satans to be guards.
To protect the commune and himself from the Black Panthers, Manson enlisted a motorcycle club called the Straight Satans. In this audio recording from the LAPD, former Straight Satans president Al Springer described their arrangement.
Charlie says, "Oh, wait a minute." He says, "Maybe I can give you a better thing than you got already." I said, "What's that?" He says, "Move up here, you can have all the girls you want. All the girls," he says, "are all yours."
3 days after the Bernard Crowe shooting, Linda Kasabian arrived at Spahn Ranch for the first time.
She was a nice girl who was looking for, I don't know if she was looking for Jesus. She was just looking for life and looking for what was real and what wasn't.
You don't find too many women who stand up to any kind of fight.
Linda Kasabian's account of this time is critical because she is one of the 4 directly involved with the Sharon Tate murders and only spent a month with Charles Manson and the group. When she was later arrested, she gave her first account of what happened to her lawyer, Gary Fleischman.
I heard her version of it the first night they brought her back. None of it made any sense. That's the problem. It was nonsensical, and that's where Vince came up with the helter-skelter theory. But I never heard that theory during the period I was representing her. She didn't know anything about it.
Days after the Bernard Crowe shooting, Bobby Beausoleil committed the first murder. The prosecution said that Manson needed money, but the specifics of this motive were never fully explained, only generally tied to Manson's preparation for a race war.
Manson wanted money. He wanted money because he was preparing for the revolution.
The prosecution contended that Manson sent Bobby Beausoleil and two women, Mary Bruner and Susan Atkins, to the home of an acquaintance named Gary Hinman. Their orders were supposedly to retrieve money from Hinman and kill him if he refused.
It's all crap. You don't have to look it up, you just have to look at it.
Nobody sent me over to recruit Gary to the family. He was as much a part of the so-called family as I was, and he wasn't a part of the family.
Bobby Beausoleil contends that in the aftermath of the Bernard Crowe shooting, Manson's arrangement with the biker gang meant that they were a constant presence at the ranch. 2 weeks before the Sharon Tate murders, Beausoleil said the Straight Satans were looking for drugs, so he offered to sell them mescaline that he could get from his former roommate, Gary Hinman. Beausoleil maintains that the Straight Satans demanded their money back the next day, claiming the drugs were bad.
I don't really believe, I think they were trying to get the drugs for free, and they were playing me for a sucker. It wasn't any, bad drugs or anything like that.
But Beausoleil was strong individual. Yeah, he was in trouble with a motorcycle, and we were dealing in the underworld, man. That's what motorcycle gangs do. I know the strongest survive.
There is a property report of Gary Hinman. And in that property report, they list homemade scales with a white powder. They didn't test it for mescaline, so we don't know if it was or not. To me, that's evidence.
With the Straight Satans threat looming, Bobby Beausoleil claims he went to Gary Hinman's house to retrieve the money from the drug deal and return it to the biker gang.
I went there for one thing, and that was to collect the money, because they have to come along. Mary, had a relationship with Gary, and I don't know why Susan Atkins has to come along. And I didn't see any problem going there. I figured it was going to be no problem, get the money back, and come back and give it to him, and it was going to be done.
As recalled by Bobby Beausoleil, when Gary Hinman refused to return the money, the confrontation escalated. Along with Mary Bruner and Susan Atkins, Beausoleil stayed at the house for 2 days thinking he could reason with Hinman to give up the money. They wrestled over a gun, which went off, but no one was hit. During the confrontation, someone called the ranch to ask for help. Bobby Beausoleil gained the upper hand and made Hinman sign over his cars.
We had these two old wrecks, and I figured between the two of them, they were worth maybe a grand, the grand that they were saying I owed them.
With the pink slips in hand, they prepared to leave. But before they could get out the door, Manson unexpectedly rushed in with a sword and cut Hinman across the face.
Charlie had slashed his face, and he left me with a problem, and I didn't know how to get out of it. I didn't know how to get away without getting arrested. Unless I killed him.
After Gary Hinman's death, someone wrote on the walls in Hinman's blood.
To be honest with you, I don't remember a lot that happened immediately after my having killed Gary. That really devastated me. My memories of what happened afterwards have never been really clear.
A Black Panther paw print was drawn on the wall, along with the words, "political piggy."
It was in everyone's mind. Everyone believed that Charlie had killed the Black Panther, according to what he had told everyone. There was an intent to try to throw the investigators off the trail.
From this perspective, Gary Hinman's murder was directly related to the Bernard Crowe shooting. They staged the crime scene to frame the Black Panthers because they feared retaliation. At the same time, Manson's intent to make others complicit had been unexpectedly furthered, preventing them from informing the police about what Manson had done. According to police records on Wednesday, August 6th, 2 days before the Sharon Tate murders, Bobby Beausoleil was arrested in one of Gary Hinman's cars.
I was in San Diego when that happened.
I heard he got arrested for murder. And I thought that the police just made it up. I didn't believe it.
I think it's important to look at the timing of this. You're looking at these murders that happened on Cielo Drive in Waverly are like 2 days later. I think it's very important that they happened then rather than a month later or 2 weeks earlier. So that indicates that they were a reaction to Bobby's arrest and the idea of getting him out of prison by committing copycat murders.
In the alternate theory, 2 days after Bobby Beausoleil was arrested, the group planned to commit an additional murder, which turned out to be Sharon Tate and those who were at her home on August 8th. After this murder, they planned to stage the crime scene to make it seem like Gary Hinman's killer was still on the loose. They reasoned this would compel police to let Bobby Beausoleil go. Charles Manson admitted this was their thinking.
He was in prison. He was in the LA County Jail when it happened. See, we were all in the brotherhood. We were all in one family. And we were helping the brother. Happened to be Beausoleil.
He told other people he was trying to send a message to me into the jail so that I wouldn't snitch on him, to make the police think they're the wrong person.
According to Bobby Beausoleil, this is not the entire picture, but reaffirms Manson's deeper motive. Committing a copycat murder at Cielo Drive to free Beausoleil would make others complicit and prevent them from talking to the police about the Bernard Crowe murder.
Depending on the orientation of whoever he was talking to, he would say things that would support some sort of agenda that he had.
Manson's agenda comes full circle when you consider that he still harbored a grudge against Terry Melcher for the song Manson had contributed to the Beach Boys, which is why, according to the alternate theory, on August 8, 1969, 2 days after Bobby Beausoleil's arrest, 4 members of the commune ventured out to the Melcher house.
I remember Charlie and Tex talking off in a corner, and it was like there was black around them. Sadie called from a field phone and asked me for 3 sets of dark clothes. And Charlie asked, what was I doing there? And I told him, and he told me they already left.
There were people at the ranch who owed Charlie favors, and he said, you owe me, I'm collecting, do something to get Bobby out of jail. I don't care what you do, but do it.
I gave my life for what I thought was a brother. Every time I do that, man, I always end up on the short end of everything because I'm stupid. I can't do school book stuff. I'm a stupid hillbilly is what it boils down to.
I know he told Tex Watson, you either take care of the problem or get on the road.
I told him 4 or 5 different ways.
You know, Tex Watson could have just left the ranch and there wouldn't have been any Tate LaBianca murders.
Tex didn't say that I told him to tell him anything.
He didn't tell nobody to do nothing. He don't tell you to do anything today. He can convince you that that's your idea because usually it is your idea.
You can do what you want to do when you make up your mind and you decide that that's what you're going to do.
What they didn't volunteer to do was to be part of something that they didn't understand, which was his need to protect himself. He manipulated them.
I remember when we first went in, one of the people said, "Who are you?" And Tex said, "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." What I saw happening in Tex, it was just like seeing somebody go crazy. Charles Manson's mind was in control of Tex's mind that night. Charlie's human too, you know, and his mental powers are just as limited, maybe not as limited as other humans, but there was an evil force in control of Tex that night.
They had died so horribly. I don't know if people really think about how, you know, and just how much they suffered. I mean, I think about Sharon Tate, and I think she must have been insane with fear by the time they got to her.
What does it take to have somebody tell you to go and kill people? For what reason? I mean, I couldn't conceive what allowed them to be influenced to go down, and they didn't kill people. They butchered people. And these are the people that I've been sleeping with.
When Susan Atkins used Sharon Tate's blood to write on the wall, it appears to call back to the previous murder, though the police never made this connection.
Sheriff's Homicide was handling the Hinman murders, and two of the homicide investigators went to the Tate investigators and said, look, we have this murder of Gary Hinman, and there's writing in blood on the wall, in Hinman's blood. So they said, we think these are connected. The LAPD investigators sent them away, said, no, they're not connected.
The prosecution maintained that the events of that summer were not connected, and that everything made sense through accepting that Charles Manson led a religious cult that was trying to start a race war called Helter Skelter, inspired by the Beatles.
If they're trying to find black people, why aren't they writing kill white people or like something very obvious?
Probably because they didn't think of it. That of course, you know, people would connect blacks because of the Beatles' White Album. Some black would figure it out and tell somebody, oh, well, the Beatles, this is part of the murders. And
it just seems like a lot of dots to connect.
If members of the group killed Sharon Tate and others as a copycat murder in order to free Bobby Beausoleil, then why did they commit more murders the next night?
The second night at the La Biancas was to cover up for what he had done the first night, which was kill a house full of people, because he didn't anticipate that. He didn't realize it was going to be this big thing that had unfolded up there at the house on Cielo. He didn't know that Terry Melcher had rented the place out, and so it basically turned into a fiasco.
It was the weekend, so he's going out the next night because he's got to cover up those Tate murders, because that's going to get out, and that's going to be nasty.
Who did kill those people?
The people that told you they killed them. They said on the way since, yeah, I killed them.
On the second night, another member of the group became complicit, 19-year-old Leslie Van Houten.
Tex was Leslie's boyfriend, okay, at the time. When Pat is explaining what happened to Leslie, as I understand it, Pat was shaken by what she'd done. But Leslie felt that she had to prove herself now. We're going to go out again, and this has to be done. She must have known that we're doing, again, the line, doing it for Bobby.
Catherine Gillies, also known as Cappy, recalls seeing Leslie Van Houten get into a car with Patricia Krenwinkel.
I had no idea where they were going. But Katie and Lulu were the closest people in the universe to me. That girl was my other me, and Katie was like our big sister. And they were going somewhere without me. And so I tried to get in the car, and they wouldn't let me. I didn't know why. They were protecting me.
Manson often speaks in riddles, ensuring that not all members of the group were aware of what was going on.
What's real has different levels. You can go on certain levels of reality that other people don't really understand at all, and they call it insanity.
The group drove to Los Feliz and parked on the north side of an intersection on Waverly Drive. Inside the home to the west was an affluent couple who owned a chain of grocery stores named Lino and Rosemary LaBianca.
It was a place that they knew. They'd been to Harold's house, which is right next door.
This audio recording from the LA District Attorney shows that the house next door to the LaBianca residence was once occupied by a man named Harold True, who knew Manson and the girls.
They called and asked if they could spend the night in their house, and we let them stay the night since the house.
Waverly?
Yeah, it was a big house. A lot of people.
Now, how did you have your phone number to call?
I don't know. Well, I guess maybe I gave them a map.
When I skipped the country, Harold True gave me his passport. And then when I got out and I went to see Charlie, I took Harold along, and Harold was a big old lumpy guy, and he thought he might get laid.
They were camping out and with the bus there and living in Harold True's place, and the neighbors called the cops. They had to leave there because the neighbors called the cops. And the neighbors were the LaBiancas. Charlie picked people that he had grudges against. He didn't just pick people at random.
This adds to the alternate theory that the second night Manson continued manipulating the others, but not because he would rule the world after a race war. Instead, it was a series of interconnected events. It began with the Bernard Crowe shooting, which led to the Gary Hinman murder and Bobby Beausoleil's arrest, which culminated in the Sharon Tate and LaBianca murders, making a significant amount of the commune complicit in satisfying Manson's outstanding grudges. There is one additional piece that appears to support this theory. According to Tex Watson's account, summarized from numerous public statements, he and Charles Manson went up to the house and got in through the back door. Manson woke up Lino LaBianca, tied him up, retrieved Rosemary LaBianca, tied her up, threatened them, and robbed them. Manson has always disputed Tex Watson's version of these events.
What does he tell you about me? Everything that's going to help him, right? You are for you. I am for me. I'm for Charlie. I didn't kill nobody.
It is undisputed that Manson drove to the LaBianca house and that he went into the house for some period of time. According to transcripts at trial, Linda Kasabian is asked, question, how long after he left the car did he return to the car? Answer, I remember we all lit up cigarettes and we smoked about 3/4 of a Pall Mall cigarette, however long that takes. What did Charles Manson do once he left the car?
If you're looking at 3/4 of a cigarette or whatever is 5 minutes. When you look at what Tex says, there's just not enough time.
Manson and Tex Watson went up to the house. After a few minutes, Manson returned, at which point Patricia Krenwinkel and Leslie Van Houten went into the house, and Manson left with the others. Those in the car claim that while in the house, Manson had retrieved Rosemary LaBianca's wallet, which police later found 20 miles away in a gas station bathroom located in Sylmar. According to the prosecution, Manson conspired to plant the wallet in a black neighborhood, reasoning a black person would use the credit cards, be connected to the murder, and that would somehow add to the race war. But this motive is contradicted by the evidence. Census data retrieved from the 1970s shows that Sylmar was not a black neighborhood.
Obviously, he got screwed up. The wallet got planted in the wrong city. I mean, there's no point in planting it in a white area and having a white person use the credit cards. That defeats the whole purpose of blaming the murders on the blacks.
If framing black people wasn't Manson's goal, then what was he trying to achieve at the LaBianca house? And what was the reason for taking Rosemary LaBianca's wallet?
Tex Watson says in his book when they got in there, Mr. LaBianca says, hey, what do y'all want? Y'all want money? I can get you money. Let's say Charlie did accept the money offer. My theory is Charlie got the money and left. That's why he left.
No one disputes that at this point Manson left, and Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten stayed at the house and murdered the LaBiancas.
With Lino LaBianca, there was a carving fork protruding out of his abdomen, and Krenwinkel had written on his abdomen W-A-R. And they found a knife with the handle sticking out of one end, the blade traversing his neck, severing a carotid artery, and part of the blade sticking out of the other side.
During the LaBianca murders, all agree that Charles Manson took the rest of the group to Venice. The prosecution insisted that Manson went to Venice to get his followers to commit another murder, once again to frame a black person and fuel the race war. According to trial testimony, Manson allegedly took his followers to the apartment building located here.
The address to that apartment building is, you could literally say, a stone's throw from the address of the Straight Satan's clubhouse in Venice. You mean that Straight Satan biker gang that Charlie owed money to? Yeah, that biker gang. They were in Venice.
In the alternate theory, after Manson shot Bernard Crowe, he feared retaliation and enlisted the Straight Satans for protection. But Bobby Beausoleil compromised this protection by getting into a conflict with the Straight Satans over a drug deal. If Manson took enough money from the LaBianca residence, he could have gone down to Venice to settle the debt that Bobby Beausoleil owed the Straight Satans from the Gary Hinman drug deal. This would have regained their protection from the Black Panthers.
It's what, 4 in the morning? 3, 4 in the morning after the LaBianca thing? They didn't go back to the ranch, they went to Venice at 3. That's how pressing this was for Charlie. They couldn't wait till Monday to do business. I think they went to Venice to pay off the Straight Satans.
When you're in the know with somebody that's in the know, you don't play games with them.
The next morning, Charlie sent Linda Kasabian down to the jail with a message for Bobby Beausoleil. Don't say anything. Everything's cool. Why all of a sudden is everything cool? By Monday, before any court proceedings started, they could get a message to Bobby. Everything's cool. We've taken care of everything. Don't say a word, nothing. We'll have you out of there soon.
By Monday morning, 7 people were dead, but the string of murders was not finished.
The neighboring rancher, he didn't like the Manson family there at the ranch. So what was going on is that they were trying to get them off the ranch.
It's been long speculated that the neighboring rancher may have recruited a ranch hand named Donald Shorty Shea to rid the Spahn Ranch of the group. Manson believed Shorty had tipped off the police, leading to a raid.
You know, there was definitely no love lost between Shorty Shea and Charles Manson, that's for sure, from all I can gather.
On August 16, 1969, 26 members of the commune were arrested on suspicion of auto theft. Because of a date error, the search warrant was ruled invalid and all were released. The police had no idea that any of them were connected to the murders making national news. After they arrived back at the Spahn Ranch, Donald Shea was never seen again.
I went to sleep in a little trailer and I heard a scream. And then I heard more screaming, and then it just didn't end. It was horrible. And it just kept going on. And I recognized Shorty's voice.
After Donald Shea's disappearance, Manson and the commune left Spahn Ranch.
Cappy suggested her grandmother had a place out there in Death Valley when he was looking for a place to go. They went out there and looked at it. He fell in love with it. And he said, this is it. This is our utopia.
The land in Death Valley was an isolated mining property owned by Catherine Gillies' grandmother. After the murders, Charles Manson and the group stayed there until October of 1969.
We went to the desert because me. I was born on the ocean and I live in the desert. And I love the desert. So I offered up the desert.
Just like authorities had in Los Angeles, Inyo County officers raided the Death Valley Ranch on August 12, 1969, on suspicion of auto theft. This time, 24 members of the group were arrested. Once again, police had no idea the group was involved in any of the murders. All the killers were imprisoned except for Patricia Krenwinkel, who went on both nights, and Tex Watson.
After the murders, Pat Krenwinkel went back to Alabama. Tex Watson went back to Texas. Nobody was holding him around.
Records show that Linda Kasabian was bailed out by her parents and returned home to Milford, New Hampshire. Before anyone else could arrange for bail, Susan Atkins confessed.
Susan Atkins is the one who broke the case. I mean, they didn't know that it was Charles Manson or Susan Atkins or anything until she blabbed to two of her cellmates.
That was her. I mean, that was very much her. Charlie would have been better killing her. And he probably would have gotten away with it a little bit longer.
While inside the county jail, Susan Atkins told her cellmates she and the group were involved in the murder of Sharon Tate. One of the first people she confessed to was a call girl named Virginia Graham.
Susan Atkins, she plopped herself down and she sat on the bunk and we started talking. And she presumed to tell me how stupid the police were and they were dumb. She said to me, you know those murders up Benedict Canyon? She says, you know who did it, don't you? And I said, no. And she said, cold as can be, you're looking at her. She didn't say helter-skelter to me. That I found out helter-skelter later on, but I don't recall her telling me helter-skelter.
Susan Atkins was denied compassionate release in 2008 and died from brain cancer in prison. But in 1969, the DA was willing to overlook the brutality of her actions.
The deal with Susan Atkins, the prosecution was going to let her plead to second-degree murder. Sharon was begging for her life. She was being held by Susan Atkins, and she said, please don't kill me, please don't kill me. I just want to have my baby.
I felt nothing. I felt absolutely nothing for her. And she begged for her life and for the life of the baby.
She said, look, bitch.
I don't care about you or your child. You're gonna die tonight. I don't feel a thing behind it.
You know, having Susan Atkins as the witness, that wouldn't have gone over too well with the jury.
The prosecutor who was working out the deal was the author of Helter Skelter, Vincent Bugliosi.
Vincent Bugliosi was an outstanding prosecutor. But if one really were to dig much deeper, what emerges is he was a womanizer. He loved attention. He was overambitious.
He had a guy sitting in court that I thought was a reporter, but it turned out it was Kurt Gentry, who Vince had hired to write a book on the case. He didn't tell anybody about it. This was going to make him rich and famous.
It's all underworld, soldier. Who do you think the president is? Who do you think his office is? Myself?
This is the Helter Skelter theory that was presented to the jury in the Charles Manson trials. Manson formed a cult of obedient followers who wanted to drop out of society. Their connection to the Bernard Crowe shooting is unknown, as the motive was not explored by the prosecution. Manson also wanted to be a rock star, was obsessed with the Beatles, and knew the Beach Boys. Through the Beach Boys, Manson came to resent Terry Melcher and considered Melcher's house a representation of the establishment. Manson believed the Beatles were predicting a race war through hidden messages in their songs, and he needed money to further his preparation. Because of this, Manson further brainwashed his cult to believe in the race war and ordered them to kill Gary Hinman. Meanwhile, to start the race war, Manson decided to murder white people and frame black people by indirectly ordering his followers to kill whoever lived at Terry Melcher's house. Manson also chose another house at random for unknown reasons and ordered its occupants to be killed. Manson's plot was to frame black people by having his followers leave indirect references to the Beatles' White Album at the crime scenes, which both the police and black people would comprehend. This would lead to a race war. Once the race war began, Manson and the family would hide in a secret cave in the desert. After the war, Manson would emerge and become the leader of the victorious Black Army and rebuild the world. This is the theory that convicted Charles Manson and others, and gained prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi fame and a best-selling book.
That's what the DA said. what they think about me according to what they want to use me for. All I'm looking for is to help me. I've always been by myself, alone.
Anything on the recordings that you know of whereby he speaks of his philosophy of helter-skelter and the ruination, damnation of this world? No.
I was really not a friendly witness. I was on parole for one thing, and I didn't want to really get connected with these people now. And this DA comes out to my house, trying to get stuff out of me that wasn't there.
They know how to milk the cow, man. And they do it so well, the cow don't even know it.
The helter-skelter theory is not only sensational, it establishes the elements of first-degree murder and conspiracy under the California law, which says that the defendant must not only agree to commit a crime, but also commit an overt act in furtherance of that agreement.
Without proving the helter-skelter motive, there was no evidence whatsoever that Manson wanted these murders to happen. You have to be a party to it. You can't just know about it.
I didn't break the law because I've been in prison all my life and I know the law. I know what conspiracy is. I'm not going to conspire to do something. That's kind of stupid, isn't it? I'm not a stupid dude. I'm dumb, but I'm not stupid.
This is the implication of what Manson was saying. It's not that he wasn't involved in the events of the summer of '69. Manson admitted to shooting Bernard Crowe, his involvement with drugs, the straight Satans, and the motive of getting Bobby out of prison. But when it comes to the murders, he purposely kept himself at a distance.
I thought it was a horrible case against him. Remember that he was not at the scene. He was 40 miles away when the murders took place. So he was an armchair murderer.
The helter-skelter theory was how the prosecution demonstrated that Manson was guilty of conspiracy and murder under the requirements of law. They described a scenario where he ordered the murders without actually saying the words.
I mean, they all knew about helter-skelter, but we didn't have any evidence that that specific night that Manson said, go out and start helter-skelter. He just said, go with Tex and do what Tex tells you to do.
They don't want to admit the truth. They had no evidence against me. None.
There was no evidence that Manson himself killed anyone. The prosecution said that Manson was guilty under the rule of vicarious responsibility. The notion that Manson's plot to start a race war made him responsible for all the crimes committed to further it.
Remember, Vince is trying to push the agenda of Charlie just came out of nowhere and said, hey, we got to start a race war. Bernard Crowe, drug dealing, car theft, auto, none of that has anything to do with this. If Vince introduces anything outside of that, it starts to wash away that helter-skelter theory. Then you have that reasonable doubt creeping in. Well, maybe it had something to do with the drug deal. And Vince doesn't want you going down that road.
People don't want to look at it from the point of view that brings them to something they don't like.
The prosecution used the race war as a basis of their legal argument. If the alternative theory is correct, might they have ignored the true nature of the events to gain a conviction? Whatever Manson's crimes, do the ends justify the means?
I think if he had had a competent lawyer, he would have either walked at the trial or walked on appeal, because there just wasn't sufficient testimony to convict him of anything.
To convict Manson, the prosecution's entire case depended on one of the murderers corroborating their theory. On December 2, 1969, 4 months after the death of Sharon Tate, the last of the murderers was captured. Linda Kasabian surrendered in New Mexico and returned to California. She immediately met with her attorney, Gary Fleischman.
I talked to her, and the only conversation I can tell you is I said, keep your mouth shut, and keep it shut in that jail. Don't talk to anybody about this, ever. I can't tell you the conversation I had with her, but I was led to believe that the murders up there started long before the Tate LaBianca case. I can't describe what she told me, but it was scary. The whole thing was scary.
At that time, Linda Kasabian had few options because Susan Atkins had already turned state's witness. According to Gary Fleischman, he had Kasabian sabotage Susan Atkins' testimony while they were both in custody to bolster her bargaining position with the prosecutors.
I had Linda pass kites to her in the jail. A kite is a little letter saying, in Charlie talk being, the DA is your lawyer, Charlie is the DA, nonsense like that. And this Atkins was a little nuts, and she then refused to testify. So now they were left with Linda, period. And then negotiations started. First, they offered me murder in the second degree. I said, no. Then they offered me voluntary manslaughter. I said, no. She was technically guilty of first-degree murder as an accessory before and after the fact.
Linda Kasabian was one of the 4 who had participated in the Sharon Tate murders and was with Charles Manson the night of the La Bianca murders. But prior to that, she had only been with the group for about 30 days and had spent little time with Manson himself.
Nobody ratted on me, except she didn't rat because she didn't know anything. What they did was they got some of the women that didn't know me. I can get in your mind.
So we typed up an immunity agreement. And the immunity agreement said Linda Kasabian will receive immunity if she testifies to the truth in the so-called Manson murders. The truth is as follows. I knew exactly what was necessary to convict him. And whether that was the truth or not wasn't my business to decide. That was Vince's business. I said, Linda, if you testify to that, you're going to walk out of that courtroom.
Charles Manson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, Charles Tex Watson, and Leslie Van Houten were all charged with murder and conspiracy. But Tex Watson had fled to his home state of Texas and faced extradition to California. With Linda Kasabian ready to testify, Tex Watson was not brought back in time for Manson's trial.
Tex sat out a whole year and watched that trial develop. And had he brought Tex in with him, there's no way he would have got that conviction.
They wanted to get rid of me. I had gone to Stanford. I was really the only lawyer in the place that knew what the hell was going on. We filed a very detailed motion to get the case out of LA County. It had like 100 newspaper clippings. And I claimed that the bad publicity was instigated by the prosecutors. And that's enough to get the case dismissed, at least on appeal. That case should have never been tried in Los Angeles County. But when we went to make a deal, we withdrew the motion.
You should have seen my face when I was sitting in the courtroom and Linda came up with a demure, this little gold cross that she was fingering, and got up on the stand and said, I'm just an angel sent here from heaven to tell the world that Charlie's a devil, not Jesus Christ.
Listen and learn. The courtroom shows our justice. The courtroom is the eye of the social consciousness. You've got to go along with the courtroom. Right or wrong hasn't got anything to do with it. I'm a mass murderer in the courtroom.
It literally branded Charles Manson the most evil, dangerous man in the world.
There's no end to my insanity. My insanity is so much genius. I've got 5 heads in one hand.
None of the defense attorneys challenged the fact that Linda Kasabian's testimony went uncorroborated.
I know how involved she was, and I won't say. But she was definitely involved, yes.
When the trial wound to a close, those associated began to fear for their lives. Many involved have since changed their names in fear of reprisal.
Live and let live. You don't let me live, you don't live. That's all. If you let me live, you live. If you don't let me live, then you get your own judgment. Everybody gets to judge themselves. I didn't want the job, you know.
Charlie went like this to me, meaning I'm going to cut your throat. And I said to him, Charlie, when you get out of jail, I'm going to have a turkey neck, bring a sharp knife to cut it. He started laughing.
They came to my house twice to kill me. My neighbor said that, the guys have been crawling over your fence.
One night during the first trial, on my way to the parking lot where I had parked, Squeaky and Sandy Good snuck up behind me and said they were going to do to my house what was done at the Tate house.
Leslie Van Houten's attorney, Ronald Hughes, went missing during the trial, leaving many to speculate.
I remember we broke for the weekend on a Friday afternoon. Manson pointed directly at Ronald Hughes and said, "Attorney, I don't want to ever see you in this courtroom again." His body was found 6 months later, but it was so badly decomposed that they couldn't tell the cause of death.
So I'll bet your bottom dollar that he said something that got under Charlie's skin, and Manson had him killed. I mean, he went up to Sespe Hot Springs and all of a sudden he's dead. I don't believe it was an accident.
After the first trial, the Manson family became infamous. Vincent Bugliosi published Helter Skelter, the best-selling true crime book of all time, beginning decades of movies, books, and TV shows showcasing Charles Manson as the incarnation of evil.
They think they're stealing, but all they're doing is stealing what I've left for them to steal. In other words, they're plagiarizing all my dreams, but I left those on the bus stop.
Such an insidiously created book. It's a curse having to live with it.
DA fucked up, man. Convicted me in the press. He didn't convict me in court.
Charles Manson and the rest continued on through the courts. They received another death sentence for the murder of Donald Shorty Shea, based primarily on the testimony of Barbara Hoyt. Tex Watson received a separate trial for the Tate LaBianca murders and was sentenced to death like the others. Following year, the California Supreme Court abolished the death penalty, and all their sentences were commuted to life in prison.
The first trial, everybody was brainwashed. Tex was brainwashed. Everybody went and killed for Charlie. But when Tex gets to trial, he wasn't brainwashed. He acted on his own.
In November of 1969, Bobby Beausoleil was tried in the murder of Gary Hinman before the DA had charged Charles Manson. Beausoleil's first trial ended in a mistrial when the jury could not come to a unanimous verdict. There was no mention of Helter Skelter.
The first trial was just a quiet little trial in Santa Monica. The jury was hung 8-4. And I didn't even testify because the case was really very weak.
In a second trial, which took place after Manson was arrested, Bobby Beausoleil was rebranded a member of the Manson family. He and Susan Atkins were sentenced to death alongside Charles Manson for the murder of Gary Hinman.
They brought up this race war thing and all of that. It was horrible, man. They did a lot of insidious things.
Those convicted of the Tate LaBianca murders remain in jail. Some, like Leslie Van Houten, have been granted parole. But because of her association with Charles Manson, her parole has been continually overturned.
I don't think that she deserves to get out. They were all lucky that they didn't suffer the death penalty.
I'm going to get her out. The DA's not operating fairly. Just follow the law, that's all. That's all I'm asking.
Lynette Squeaky Fromm served 35 years in prison for attempting to assassinate President Gerald Ford. She was paroled in 2009. Vincent Bugliosi died in 2015, but his book, Helter Skelter, has become gospel in terms of information on Charles Manson.
hard for me to believe that all this time has gone by, man.
Charles Manson was not an innocent man, but does it matter how we know that? Should those in power be allowed to construct their own truth in the pursuit of justice?
I see things as they really are in truth. You've got a constitution in the United States, and they read it and they study it in school, but they never really understand the validity of it and how powerful it really is.
I don't care who it is, if somebody doesn't get a fair trial, then we're all in trouble.
Do I think he suffered an injustice? Not really. Not in my heart of hearts. But as a matter of litigation, yes, he did suffer an injustice. Whether morally he suffered an injustice, I don't think so.
This leaves some to ask if the prosecution had pursued the alternative theory with its brutal but less sensational elements, would anyone even know Charles Manson? And would he have died in prison?
I believe what I'm told to believe. Don't you?